Today on Uncommon Knowledge, preventing an American Hiroshima.
Funding for this program is provided by the John M. OLIN Foundation.
Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Our show today, preventing nuclear terrorism. The prospect of a nuclear weapon detonated in the heart of a major American city is too horrible to contemplate. Unfortunately, many experts argue, it is not only horrible, but likely. What can we do to make sure such a catastrophe never takes place? Can we make sure? Joining us today, two guests. Scott Sagan is co-director of the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford and the co-author of the book, The Spread of Nuclear Weapons, A Debate Renewed. Graham Allison is a professor of government at Harvard and the author of Nuclear Terrorism, the Ultimate Preventable Catastrophe. Investor Warren Buffett, who knows enough about calculating odds to have become one of the richest men in the world, quote, the danger of a nuclear terrorist attack is the ultimate depressing thing. It will happen. It's inevitable. I don't see any way that it won't happen. Close quote. Is a nuclear attack by terrorists in the United States inevitable? Graham?
Yes, if we just keep doing what we're doing, but no, if we act to prevent it.
Scott?
No, but it is a catastrophe waiting to happen, and there's a lot that we need to do to make sure it does not happen soon.
All right. Nuclear weapons are big and cumbersome and expensive, and during the Cold War, when we had an arsenal of many thousands and the Soviet Union had an arsenal of many thousands, we had a lot to worry about. But the Soviet Union doesn't even exist anymore, so although we have new worries, terrorists flying airplanes into buildings, nuclear weapons are something on which we ought to be able to relax. Why is that view mistaken?
Well, I think you expressed the view very well, because for large numbers of Americans, the idea that nuclear weapons were what the Cold War were about.
Yes.
That the Cold War's over. My dad used to tell me this. He said, Cold War's over. We won. Move on. You know. I said, Pop, that's right, except for two things. One, the weapons didn't go away. These weapons have long, long shelf life. And the material from which you could make additional nuclear weapons didn't go away. It actually has half-lives of thousands of years. So we are left with the leftovers, the remains of the Cold War, and there continue to be nuclear weapons in Russia and in other states like Pakistan, or indeed maybe even North Korea, which could come loose. Or secondly, and even more threatening, there are thousands of potential nuclear weapons of highly enriched uranium and plutonium, which if they came into the hands of a terrorist group like Al-Qaeda, they could make a homemade nuclear bomb that would fit in the back of a van and would blow up a city.
So it is no longer the case that these things are expensive and difficult to make? Are there pieces of nuclear weapons that terrorists would have to steal? Could they make everything from scratch?
It'd be hard to make everything from scratch. What they could do is steal the materials or the weapons themselves. So if they stole a weapon, or were given a weapon from the Pakistani arsenal, or given one from the former Soviet Union's arsenal, they'd have a ready-made weapon.
Right.
Alternatively, they could steal materials. It takes 35 to 40 pounds of highly enriched uranium to make a bomb.
Now, the highly enriched uranium, that is still tough to make.
It's tough to make.
Tough and expensive
but it exists in lots of places.
All right,
the question is how well do we guard the materials that we have in the United States? Serious problem.
Okay.
How well do we guard the materials that we've sold to other countries to help spread nuclear technology? Because we thought it was such a great idea to have nuclear energy, we sold nuclear materials to many countries.
The highly enriched.
Go ahead. I think your instinct is right, that making highly enriched uranium or plutonium is too hard for a terrorist group. This is a huge undertaking.
We do at least have the advantage that there's one thing they can't do for themselves.
Make it, yes.
And that remains true.
That's a multi-billion-dollar investment over a number of years. Iran has been working on this project for 18 years and is just coming to the finishing point. So they can't make it. The question is, can they get it other ways? Okay. And the way they're most likely to get it, I agree with Scott, is they would steal it, or even more likely, some crook in Russia or Pakistan steals it and sells it.
Corruption, black market. Let's move on to what Graham Allison calls the doctrine of the 3 no's. In your book, Graham, you write that there are 3 no's on which we must act in order to ensure that a nuclear catastrophe does not take place in this country. The first no, Graham, is no loose nukes. Explain what you mean by that.
No nuclear weapons or nuclear materials from which a weapon could be made,
right.
Highly enriched uranium or plutonium, which means locking down all weapons and all materials to what I call a new gold standard. The U.S. loses no gold from Fort Knox, not any. Russia loses no treasures from the Kremlin armory. So the proposition is the U.S. and Russia would define a standard, and the 2 presidents would commit to each other that they would secure all the weapons and all the material in their own country,
right,
on the fastest technically feasible timetable, not the kind of methodical process that we've been going along with, and that they would do so in a way that was sufficiently transparent to the other, that the other would have some reason for believing it. I even have a little scheme in the book in which we would have Russians explaining to us how they would steal an American nuclear weapon, because they don't need one of our weapons, and we would be explaining to them how we would steal a Russian weapon in order to shore up the system.
Each other, right. Is that feasible then, to lock down nuclear material all over the world?
I think it's much harder. It's more easily said than done, let me put it that
absolutely.
way. In the United States today, we frankly don't know how secure some of our own facilities are, because of the way that we've gone around in a very lackadaisical manner.
Energy facilities or weapons facilities?
Weapons facilities in terms of how well they're guarded. I'll give you an example. Last year at the DOE plant,
Department
of Energy
yes.
plant at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, they have the procedures there, as we have in every place, trying to meet Graham's gold standard. We have guards. They are tested by having mostly former SEALs, run by a private consulting company.
Right.
Brings them in, contractors.
These are tough, shrewd guys who try to break in.
Yeah, and it's a test. It's an exercise.
Right.
And you try to pass the exercise, and that shows that you're secure.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, the Department of Energy discovered that the guards and the would-be terrorists, the simulators, the exercise teams, were collaborating. They're sharing information to make sure that the people on the inside passed the test, because they were friends. They happened to work for the same company, Wackenhut.
A test vital to our national security was a sham.
Was a sham. And so they've ordered a whole new set of these tests. We're not meeting our own gold standard. We've had inadequate safety and security in our own
That's the situation
sites.
in this country. You report in your book, you recount an interview that General Lebed of the Soviet Union, now dead, died in a helicopter accident, as I recall, came to this country, and in the course of his interviews, he said, oh, by the way, something like 80 of our smallest nuclear weapons, 1 kiloton suitcase weapons, are missing, and we don't know where they are. Was he telling the truth? Do we still have reason to believe that the Soviets don't even know where all their nuclear weapons are?
I believe, as of now, that we have no basis for confidence that these 84 weapons are accounted for. In the response to the initial Lebed acknowledgement, which wasn't he didn't make an announcement, he sort of...
It was in the middle of interviews, he was chatting about this, that, and the other. Right.
The Russian government first said there was no such weapons, they never existed. Then they said simultaneously that all such weapons were accounted for. Then they said all such weapons had been destroyed. Now, subsequently, there have been 3 or 4 more pieces of information in which there's no question, there's 100% likelihood that they had such weapons. And indeed, they have acknowledged that they didn't have individual serial numbers on them, so they didn't have unique identifiers. So that makes it much less confident that they got them all and collected them appropriately. So we know we haven't found any anywhere else. That's the good news. But we don't know what we don't know.
The second. On to Graham's second no. I'm waiting for you fellows to start cheering me up, by the way. This is sounding pretty grim so far.
We are not going to be cheering you up today, I'm afraid, too.
No new nascent nukes. Graham, explain that one for us.
Well, this is a new term, nascent nukes, by which I mean national production of highly enriched uranium and plutonium. So if we could lock up all the weapons and material that currently
That already exist,
and then we could stop production of any new material,
right?
then we're getting a handle on the problem. Now this requires dealing right now with it's complex, but the Non-Proliferation Treaty gives states who sign up to be non-nuclear weapon states the right, the entitlement, as the Iranians keep saying, to have a factory for making enriched uranium or for even reprocessing plutonium. If they get across that line, which they're just about to do, they're within months of completing their factories, the Iranians. If they succeed in getting across that line, there's no further transparent, policeable point between that and making nuclear weapons. And so what I'm proposing is that we strengthen and, in effect, reinterpret the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we do it in the Iranian case as a test case. I think if Iran were gotten to freeze where they are now and back down, one would be able to then shore up this new standard.
So as we tape this program, the 35-member International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's watchdog, has just called on Iran to freeze all uranium enrichment and related programs and to open its facilities to inspections. That's the good news. In the same statement, however, the IAEA reaffirmed Iran's right to develop nuclear energy, and with it, the highly enriched uranium. So what we have here is the UN's Atomic Watchdog Agency still isn't serious. Is that right?
No, I think it's very serious. What they're trying to do is cut and sever the linkage between building nuclear energy capabilities and building nuclear weapons. As Graham correctly said, in the past, the bargain was, if you agree not to get nuclear weapons,
right,
we, the nuclear states, will let you get nuclear energy. Indeed, we'll encourage it. We'll sell you, we'll help you.
Right.
And what we discovered was that there was a loophole. People could cheat. So the North Koreans and, it really appears, the Iranians were members of the treaty, used the nuclear energy clause to get capabilities that will give them nuclear weapons.
And went right ahead and cheated.
What Graham has proposed, and what Mohammed al-Baradei, the head of the IAEA, has proposed, is let's still maintain a right for states to get nuclear power.
Right.
Many states want it, and we're not going to unilaterally be able to impose a new set of rules. But let's make it so that the power that they will get will not be able to be transferred into nuclear weapons. So let's have only low enriched uranium. Any facilities that they get that have new materials, the materials will be either internationally owned or owned by the United States or owned by Russia and will go back if the treaty, if that state ever resigns from the treaty. But we have to offer something in return. I think that's where there's a gap right now.
We, the United States, or
correct.
the United Nations?
We,
the
United States. Regardless of what administration is in power, the non-nuclear states who are being asked to have restrictions now on your nuclear power capabilities are saying, well, what's in it for us?
If they behave, what do we give them as a reward?
What do we give them in reward? And I believe,
the answer is?
I believe part of it is our own nuclear policy with respect to nuclear weapons needs to change. We, as part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, agreed under Article 6 that we would work in good faith towards the eventual elimination of nuclear weapons. Now, no one thought that we were going to do that overnight. No one wanted to set an explicit time frame for it.
But it's now been 40-some years since we signed that treaty?
More importantly, in 1995, when we got the states who were non-nuclear members to say, we'll keep this treaty forever, we said, well, as a sign that we're really going to mean it when we say we'll work in good faith, we'll sign and ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban. How can we say you can never develop nuclear weapons or even nuclear energy capabilities that could be used for nuclear weapons in the long term if we keep testing nuclear weapons? They said, fine, under that deal, we'll sign it. They signed their end, and we rejected. And if we test nuclear weapons over the next 4 years, I think all hell will break.
Are you in agreement there? It was a mistake for us to reject the test ban?
Absolutely. In fact, I think absolutely, that was a mistake. But I think that, and I agree with Scott, that trying to think about, the U.S. doesn't need nuclear weapons except for other states that have nuclear weapons. So if there were no nuclear weapons, the U.S. would be better off.
Which leads me to your...
Next, the third no in Graham's doctrine for preventing nuclear terrorism.
No new nuclear weapon states. This time let me quote Scott. The goal should be this is your book. The goal should be radically smaller and safer arsenals in all existing nuclear states, we've talked about that, and the maintenance of non-nuclear status for other nations. The nuclear states today are the United States, Russia, China, Pakistan, India, fill me in,
Israel.
Israel, France, and Great Britain.
In Britain.
Eight officially recognized and
And
stated.
North Korea, right there on the border, either with a handful of weapons or about to get them.
Okay, so fellas, how do you tell North Korea no?
I would say first we try to determine how bad would it be if North Korea actually has a nuclear test, declares itself a nuclear weapon state, completes this production line that'll allow it to produce another dozen weapons a year. And I think there's every reason to believe that this North Korea will sell nuclear weapons to Al-Qaeda and everybody else because they've shown themselves willing to sell whatever they make, and they have only three cash crops: missiles, illegal drugs, and counterfeit $100 bills.
The development of nuclear weapons by North Korea becomes a casus belli. It is a cause for war.
Unfortunately, they've already crossed that line. That was actually the right strategy of having carrots and sticks in the Clinton administration. They said if you take the materials out of the reactor, that will not be acceptable, and that is a red line.
The Clinton administration said to the North Koreans.
Correct.
Right.
In '95.
And they crossed the red line.
No, they didn't.
Oh, they didn't.
They froze. That was the part of the agreed framework. I have students.
We believe they actually did live up to it.
Yes.
All right.
Now, what they did was cheat. They had a separate program, and we caught them because they got aid from Pakistan, having a separate program that was going to take years. Unfortunately, during the Bush administration, was very aggressive verbally. And then when the North Koreans began to start crossing the line, the Bush administration was so concerned about Iraq and was so focused on what was going on in Iraq that they let the North Koreans cross the line. Unfortunately, it's too late for us to say your development of nuclear weapons is going to be a cause of war, because they will say, sorry, we haven't. Now, we don't know 100% because they haven't tested one. What we do know, because a group of Stanford professors and a group of government officials along with them went to see the plant at Yongbyon and were shown the reactor pools with all the materials taken out.
Right.
Indeed, Sig Hecker, the former director of the Los Alamos laboratory, on that trip was handed a piece of what he believes was plutonium, showing that the North Koreans had gone that far as to develop this. Now, Sig can't guarantee 100% that what he had in his hand was plutonium, but it felt like plutonium. It had the right heat signature. Everything. He knows what plutonium is. Everything that he said to Congress and to individuals suggests that's what this was.
Okay, so for the next, this will air after the election, for the next administration, what does one do about North Korea?
I
think bomb them?
I think North Korea is potentially the greatest failure. If North Korea ends up as a nuclear weapon state with a nuclear weapons production line, historians will judge this the greatest failure of American foreign policy. Now, what to do now? And it may turn out to be too late. It may turn out. I still don't think it is. I would go to them now with a whole big bundle of carrots and an arsenal of sticks. The carrots would include economic assistance that South Korea, Japan, China, now Great Britain are eager to provide. It would give them assurance from the U.S. that we're not going to attack them to change their regime by force. But would it include on the downside, in terms of sticks, very severe economic sanctions, because this is an economic basket case to start with, plus a credible military threat. And the question is, can that be constructed? And I believe it can.
You believe it can?
A credible military threat to destroy all the facilities we know about, and to try to give them to believe, and maybe it is the case, that we know where all the facilities are.
Can I just ask?
Given the chilling scenarios that our guests have laid out, why has our government not done more to address this threat?
Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times, quote, "What I find baffling, an utter failure of the political process. The risk that a nuclear explosion will devastate an American city is greater now than it was during the Cold War, and it's growing," close quote. You're a political scientist, you've served in government. Why should it be that more than 3 years after 9/11, we have done so little to address this threat?
Both Graham and I are political scientists, and both of us have served.
I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Both of us have served in the government.
You're both political scientists.
I think both of us would agree.
I think both of us don't know.
Well, I think both of us would agree that government bureaucracies do the same thing over and over and over again, unless there's an outside shock that forces them to change their standard operating procedures.
There is no...
9/11 was a big shock for many bureaucracies, but for the nuclear establishment, it was far less of a shock. And the American public hasn't pushed the nuclear establishment in the United States to change sufficiently.
Now, Graham writes about a shocking incident. It took place a month after 9/11, in which the White House received intelligence they could not dismiss that somebody had smuggled a nuclear weapon into New York City. And there was a scramble, and Cheney was sent to the famous undisclosed location. They didn't even tell the politicians. Rudy Giuliani wasn't informed for fear of creating a panic. But indeed, they did panic and sent inspectors up. It turned out to be a false alarm.
That's not panicking.
That's not panicking.
No, that's why.
They did the right
prudent.
thing.
That's prudent behavior.
Okay, but my point there is that the President of the United States sat at the Oval Office and presumably in a pool of sweat until he received word that he could relax on that subject. Isn't that a shock to the system? Rumsfeld knew what was going on. Condoleezza Rice knew what was going on. Cheney was in an undisclosed location. Why haven't these guys? You could name the people who run our defense and foreign policy establishment, and they were sweating bullets.
Before I wrote this book, actually, I tried to sell the doctrine of three no's to Bush for the Bush doctrine. I worked with Powell when I worked for Weinberger a long time ago.
All right.
in the Weinberger.
And we can stipulate that these are intelligent, patriotic individuals.
And I talked to all the folks at the Defense Department, including Rumsfeld, about this, and to Condi Rice, who I know was an academic in previous years. I don't get it. I think, but my best interpretation would be the following. For whatever combination of reasons, after the war on terrorism got started and we finally destroyed the Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan,
Right.
the president decided to go to Iraq.
And that blinked out all other activities.
As one of these folks said to me, sucked up all the oxygen from the administration, so no other difficult initiative could even be considered. And I say, if we had taken the energy, the focus, the determination,
Right.
the money, the military power, the diplomatic leverage, if that had been addressed to the problem of preventing nuclear terrorism, this problem would be essentially solved. And in fact, I mean, as was discovered by my colleague, Matt Braun, it's just confirming what Scott said, in the 2 years after 9/11, fewer potential nuclear weapons in Russia were secured than in the 2 years before 9/11. So you just think, this can't be the case. But for whatever reason, this hasn't seized people's guts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's another reason I think that we haven't focused on, which is the war on terrorism has made Pakistan one of our central allies.
Oh, right.
Pakistan is an essential ally in the war on terrorism.
As regards knocking out the Taliban in Afghanistan.
And helping the fight against Al-Qaeda.
However,
with respect to nuclear weapons, Pakistan may be one of our biggest enemies, our biggest headaches, our biggest nightmares.
can I just ask,
Last topic. To what extent can we simply buy our way to safety?
your three no's, Graham, don't they all come down to the United States buying off a lot of the world? Isn't that really the meaning of Nunn-Lugar, that we pay the Soviets to lock down their, or destroy their...
I think money is the...
I mean, I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with the
I'm
plan.
not,
We're
no, I'm
by far the richest nation on earth.
No, I would be
If that's all it was, it would be great.
If it was a matter of money, I would say that would be
Spend
easy.
it.
The money is the smallest part of the problem. The larger part of the problem is a president who says, I'm just simply not going to let this happen, and I'm going to cause to happen everything that I can, humanly, to prevent it.
How many members of Congress understand the importance?
I would say Senator Lugar has been an absolutely giant on this topic.
John
And there's
McCain?
and McCain is kind of, I would say, somewhat got it, but I would say there's a half dozen who feel it deeply and mostly not.
From the afterword to Tom Clancy's novel about nuclear blackmail, The Sum of All Fears, I'm quoting Clancy now. What required billions of dollars in the 1940s is much less expensive today. The fact of the matter is that a sufficiently wealthy individual, we know that Osama bin Laden is worth some hundreds of millions of dollars, a sufficiently wealthy individual could, over a period of from 5 to 10 years, produce a multi-stage thermonuclear device. I hardly even know how to pose the question, but by the end of this decade, what are the chances that things will have gone wrong in this country? Which is another way, let me put it more positively. What are the chances that we will have awakened to the problem sufficiently to do about it what must be done?
Well, what I say in the book and what I believe strongly is that if we just keep doing what we're doing, this is going to happen, may even be imminent, certainly more likely than not before the decade is out. So now then the question is, what's the likelihood that a president and an administration and a Congress and the members of Congress and ordinary people say, hey, this is crazy. A preventable ultimate catastrophe, the obligation is on us to prevent it. So I'm hoping that people say, okay, we're going to get this in focus and we're going to act on it.
Scott?
Peter, we have two choices. One is that someday, over the next decade, there'll be a nuclear explosion in an American city. And everybody will wake up, and it'll be like after 9/11. They'll say, how could we have let this happen? Why didn't we spend more money on loose nukes in Russia? Why didn't we secure the Pakistani and Indian nuclear arsenals? Why didn't we have better protection of our own facilities, wherever that bomb came from? And then we'll all say, oh, we'll do our study, we'll have an intelligence reform, and we'll do the kinds of things we normally do after disaster. That's one option. The other option is to look at the different proposals. Many great ones are in Graham's good book, and to say, let's take those steps now. Let's not wait for a disaster. Now, there will be some who say this is all hype. This is all speculation. We don't know. And the answer is we don't know exactly what the probability is. But I can guarantee one thing, the probability will go up if we don't take these steps.
Graham Allison, Scott Sagan, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge. Thanks for joining us.
We welcome your comments on this week's show. Our email address, comments@uncommonknowledge.tv. For more information about Uncommon Knowledge, please visit our website, www.uncommonknowledge.tv.
Funding for this program was provided by the John M. Olin Foundation.